It's like a relationship. You're gonna be with them for the duration of the company. And I know founders don't believe this, but the ability of the investor to value add, sometimes the founder is so focused in that space. Someone like the investor can be a little bit on the outside and give you some really useful advice because they're seeing things from a different perspective. Someone you get along with, someone you know who can add value to the company as you grow, someone who's got the network and who can be there for you. Because you know, being a founder is a bloody lonely job.
So today I'm with Bindi, who I've known for a long time from her time at Microsoft. But rather than me doing the big introduction, because you've achieved a lot since then, Bindi, could you share with us who you are and tell us about the journey of your idea?
Oh wow, hi, I'm Bindi Korea. Been involved in the UK and European and global tech ecosystem for ever, it seems, probably the last 20 years. I launched the early stage startup business for Microsoft in the UK way back in 2007. And back then it was known Microsoft BizSpark and BizSpark 1. But that's now evolved into Microsoft Ventures, Microsoft Accelerator, and M12. So it's actually amazing to see how the journey of that startup accelerator became so many different parts of how Microsoft engages with startups. So that's kind of a good journey of an idea from there. I joined Silicon Valley Bank in early 2013 and launched their early stage banking business unit. So that was, again, really fun and interesting. And of course, after working with thousands of entrepreneurs, in late 2015, I decided to branch out and launch my own advisory business. And that's what I've been doing ever since. And I split that business into 4 concepts about the innovation ecosystem. So startups, investor, corporates, and government. And I really work across the intersection of all 4 and spend time in all 4. So I've really always been in early at something and then seen the launch of it, and then I tend to jump out and go back in early into something.
So you've been immersed in this world for a long time, and you are what we would class as an industry expert, and you have been exposed at every level of success. You know, big, massive companies, biggest. Are they still the biggest in the world? Microsoft? They're certainly.
Yeah, I think Microsoft still is one of the biggest. Yeah. Absolutely.
So from that to like a 2-man band.
Yeah.
I mean, you've literally seen it all.
I've seen it all.
Are there any? And you've seen success and failure as well.
Yeah.
Are there any common threads, traits, characteristics that you think you've witnessed along the way? I
mean, it's a big question to ask, right? So I think there's lots of ways to look at it. I think it's an amazing concept to have an idea. So whether it's an idea to launch a business unit or a new startup and a new product. But to me, the journey is all about how you execute on it. So certainly when you look at it from a venture perspective, how do you execute and deliver on it? We were having this conversation earlier where I said there could be, right now the hottest thing in tech is climate tech, and maybe the sort of merger of climate tech and fintech. And you might have 10 carbon accounting systems and platforms being built, but the real idea that turns into success is the group that executes on that idea and is able to get traction and is able to drive, customers and is listening to their customer base and building their product around what that customer base is. And more importantly, it understands a need in the market. Because actually so many times I've seen ideas that are ahead of its time and it just wasn't the right timing for it. But then 5-10 years later, it becomes the right time. And so for me, that's actually really fascinating. It's not just the idea, it's about the execution and it's about timing and if the market's ready for it.
And how do you know that?
Oh God. I guess for me, because I've been in the industry for so long, you kind of see the cycles, right? So 2007, 2008 was obviously the crash, in a lot of the world, the market crash. But technology was just starting and it was up and coming and it became the mobile area and the mobile app era. And that's really what we've seen the last 10 years. And now we're talking a lot about, and I'm still learning about it myself, sort of Web3 and the concept of, the whole new brand of web. And blockchain and crypto and all of these type of technologies that are now up and coming. So I think it's all about eras. I know we've been talking a lot about the metaverse and virtual reality and XR, But interesting enough, from a venture perspective, I think 5 years ago, there was a lot of money that went into XR startups, but have they been able to execute yet? Not quite, just because have the consumers been ready for it? And now we're seeing companies like Facebook and likely Apple putting a lot of money into that space. So maybe now the market will be ready for it. But we're seeing a generation of entrepreneurs from 5-7 years ago that had that idea and concept, but they just don't have the funding to keep going for the 10-year cycle it takes to get to that level of delivery and market acceptance. It really is about timing for me.
If I'm an entrepreneur and I'm looking to, I want to create a business, and not everybody has a burning passion for a particular specialist subject, would you recommend like choosing a growth sector, or would you recommend finding my passion and purpose?
I guess it depends. For me personally, it's about what are you passionate about, because the entrepreneurs I've chosen to work with and the entrepreneurs that I know a lot of seed funds work with, they see there's a passion and purpose, but there's also a passion and purpose where there's a market need. Because ultimately in venture, it is about taking that bet. It is about looking at waves of technology and investment. And you know, the wave right now might be climate tech or net zero or deep tech or artificial intelligence or, you know, mobility and smart cities or whatever it is. So we're investing in waves, and actually the good entrepreneur has that passion, but has that passion for the gap in the market and usually what is timely. And some wonderful entrepreneurs are ahead of their time and they just stick it out as well. There's a drive because they really want to solve that problem. So I don't think there's any one right answer fits all. And I think it's even rarer to see a founder, CEO go on to be, you know, long-term CEO. And those are the Apples, the Facebooks, the Oracles, the Microsofts of the world who sort of last those kind of long, and they're industry changing, and they are, you know, generational defining.
Could you give us any insight into what investors are looking for and that enables them to say yes, and more importantly, why investors say no?
As a founder, I would always say, go to the investor that has the hypothesis that backs what you do. Because that investor that has that hypothesis that is similar to what you do will have looked at 10, 20, 30 companies in the space and know through their research and insight building what works. So I think that's the first thing. As the founder, you need to have done your research. And sometimes an investor will say no because the founder is like, I'm the only one doing this, and the investor knows fully well there's 30 others doing it. So it shows the founder hasn't done enough insight building into the space. So that's one big reason I hear them say no. Another reason is they've looked at the 30 companies and they're like, well, there's another company that actually we think can do it better. So it's not necessarily about the founder or the idea, and the idea might be right, but they've just found another company that they feel can do it better and will make them their returns. Because ultimately, certainly the fund I work with, we have a slightly different approach to market because we're we're FTSE 250 and listed on the stock exchange, but a typical VC fund has 10-year cycle, and the people, the LPs putting money into the fund, expect a return. So you've also got to go in as an investor and understand how you're going to get a return on that investment to pay back the fund and to, you know, satisfy the returns expectations of LPs. So another thing the founder could think about is, where is the investor coming from? And, you know, help them think through that. But ultimately also be driven and get your head down and get it done, right? Crowdfunding is a good beginning way. This is a little bit old school thinking, but actually, to me, I still think if you're funding through the crowd is saying, you know, the market's saying, oh, well, we want to invest in this because it's such an interesting concept. And the investor can look at it going as a signal from the market, there's initial traction here. And there's an initial group of fans who think this is a really interesting product. But that doesn't mean you're necessarily going to get to the next level. So I think for the founder, I think most founders, and this is what makes them amazing, and same thing for me, is like you're focused, right? You're focused on the problem, you're focused on delivering a company, but sometimes step back and think of the bigger picture of where other people in your ecosystem are coming from. So think out of your box, but deliver in your box, I think is how I would observe the most successful founders working.
It's great advice. And one thing that struck me as an entrepreneur myself, from what you've just said, is that obviously different investors will have different criteria, objectives, motives, and all that kind of stuff. Do you have a one-size-fits-all investment proposition, or do you tailor it for each individual person you're speaking to?
It's never going to be a one-size-fits-all, right? But maybe the market will head in that direction, right? Because people are now looking at platform and AI-driven investing. And the platform will go out and crawl the market for founders, startups that meet that criteria, and then they'll bring them in. But ultimately, you have to look at all the variables, right? And certainly all the deals I've sat through in my years is quite tailored. It's very, very tailored in my view. And the investor takes a lot of time to be thoughtful and think about what will be successful in that market. And one investor might say yes, but another might say no, because it matches their hypothesis, right? Investors are entrepreneurs too, right? They've got to make returns. They have investors at the top of the food chain. And they're trying to get that return as well, just like the entrepreneur is, so.
And if you're in the fortunate situation where you have several offers on the table, have you any advice as to how to choose an investor?
It's like a relationship, right? It's like a marriage. You're going to be with them for the duration of the company. And so you better have a good working relationship with them. They're going to be on your board. They're going to help you determine the direction of your company. So it's got to be a really trusting situation, and good for the founder that has, 5-7 term sheets on the table. And there's some great companies out there that have had that. Pick the one that you have that relationship with, but also pick the one that has that. And I know founders don't believe this, but the ability of the investor to value add. So, you're trying to grow your team and they might know someone. You're trying to move into a new market, they might know someone. You're moving into a new territory, they might know someone. You want to do a growth round, well, they're going to know people further up the investor food chain, so they might know someone. And someone maybe who's been there, done that as well. They're operator style investors and they're financial investors, and both add their kind of value. So look at how valuable they're going to be with you towards your growth. And then I think we don't really talk about this enough, but I find myself, I hate this word, it's a bit cliche, but I find myself sometimes being an agony aunt to the founders I work with. So last night at 10:30 at night, I was helping a founder write something quite personal. And she knew she could message me and go, what do you think of this? I'd like to release it in the morning. And I chose, not all investors are like that, but I chose to take the time and go, yeah, what about this? What about that? Because sometimes the founder is so focused in that space. Someone like the investor and who's your board member can be a little bit on the outside and give you some really useful advice because they're seeing things from a different perspective. So someone you get along with, someone who can add value to the company as you grow, someone who's got the network. I think having a network is hugely key. And who can be there for you. Because, being a founder is a bloody lonely job. But also the good investor has a fiscal responsibility to make sure the company performs. So you've got to be aware that is also what a good investor board member will do as well.
I think you mentioned the good investor, and I have a friend who got a bad investor, the investment company decided halfway through that they were not going to support his particular category anymore, and therefore kind of made his life incredibly difficult. What are the options to a founder if they find that marriage isn't a bed of roses like they wished?
I think first of all, it's so black and white when you go like bad investor, good investor. So I think it's kind of phases of gray. It's not great behavior if they decide to abandon a category and not support you going forward. But what the investor could do is explain why they're not supporting you going forward. I think that's key. You could potentially convince that investor to do a secondary round so they can sell those shares on to newer investors who decide they want to back the category. So that's one potential opportunity. It is difficult. I always say as well, reach out to other founders, find your peer group and understand what other founders have done. And I don't think we do that enough. We think our journey is so lonely, but this is what I've learned through communities like ICE and Snowball and other entrepreneurial communities I'm part of. We learn from each other. So learn from your peers and see, what are some war stories of what they've done. And you might be able to learn from there. But, ideally get them off your cap table. If they're not going to be there for you, get them off the cap table. That's just my personal perspective. Other investors or other advisors will have very different perspectives. But I'd be like, move on and try to find people that buy into your vision. And then actually sometimes you might have to just face it and go, this isn't going to work. And you have to make that brutal decision. And I assume you're probably going to interview founders that have had to make that brutal decision. But sometimes you have to take a long, cold, hard look at yourself, the company, the market dynamics, and go, this is not going to work. And you've got to be thoughtful about that as well. Also try to understand the dynamics of why the investor isn't backing you going forward. So look at yourself as one concept.
To first-time entrepreneurs, so people who've kind of got their business to a certain level of scale and they're ready, prepared, and excited about the next stage. Everything you've just said can become quite overwhelming. Like, where on earth do I start? And not everybody is fortunate enough to have a Bindi that is sitting beside them to guide them through this. So what advice do you have for someone who's at the beginning of this in terms of negotiating these choppy waters?
I always say start with friends, families, and fools, right? And again, that's a bit old school, but in terms of get the product, get an MVP up and running, and get people early on that believe in you. And it could be you put your own money into it, your own time into it, join an incubator or accelerator. So there are programs like Entrepreneur First, and I'm on the investment committee of a really cool one in Cambridge called Carbon 13. And what they do is they bring founders together or aspiring founders together, and there's a structured program to help you create the company. And then there's a lot of mentors that come in and help you. So that could be one way to do it. Get investment, cash in whatever you have, your ISAs, which is a British kind of savings tool, but there's different ones in every country. Cash it in and, put your money where your mouth is. So I think that's certainly what I did when I left the security of a nicely paid banking job. I'm like, what was I thinking? But I did cash everything in, and I've used that to put money into companies myself. And it's a bit crazy for me to do that, but you got to take the risk because that demonstrates to other people that you're putting your money where your mouth is. And I think if you've got that passion and drive, you'll just get through it. And I think the other thing is surround yourself with people that or networks that are going through the same journey as you, right? So there's lots of different ways, and take it in little bite sizes, not big chunks.
And if you could distill down, everything you've done, everything you've seen, everything you've experienced into one piece of advice, nugget of wisdom, insight to share with our viewers about the entrepreneurial journey of an idea?
Don't give up. Simple.
Brilliant. Well, Bindi, thank you very much indeed for your time today and for taking the time to speak to us. Cool. Very much appreciate it, and for sharing the journey of many people's ideas. Thank you.
Great.